even if, for a second, we assume that Albert did what he was convicted of, and that's a big if, but if for a minute we assume he did that, our experts have told the state over and over again, what you're doing doesn't make sense even then, because it's been decades since the alleged crime, and it's been decades of good behavior, decades of no problem within the prison system. And so at this point, it really is just cruel and unusual treatment that doesn't make sense. The prison is no safer because we keep Albert Woodfox locked in a cell 23 hours a day. If anything, we're diverting resources to somebody who doesn't need that level of supervision, away from some folks who maybe needed a little bit more.
Their cases are the classic example of why we must reduce or end the overuse of solitary confinement. No question about it that they are very important.
Long-term solitary confinement has become a regularized practice in American prisons, and Albert and Herman may be the leading edge of this practice, but there are thousands of prisoners now in every state who've been in solitary confinement for 5, 10, 15 or more years.
It could be as high as over 100,000 people a day in solitary confinement, and that's just a number that's far too high. But this is just something we ought not do.
The campaign against Louisiana's treatment of Herman and Albert had brought the wider issue of solitary confinement into the limelight, both in Washington and abroad. By 2013, the case of the Angola Three was becoming an international scandal.
For Amnesty International, it is deeply shocking to know that there are two men who have spent almost 40 years, practically every day of that 40 years, in solitary confinement. And I think that when the US behaves like this, when it treats people in its prison system in this way, it demeans itself in front of the rest of the world.
Mr. Woodfox is being held in conditions that amount to cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, at least if not torture. There's no question that his conditions inflict on him the kind of pain and suffering of a mental nature that is associated with torture, and I think that should stop.
If a cause is noble enough, you can carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I thought that my cause, then and now, was noble. So therefore, he could never break me.
You have 15 seconds left on this call.
They might bend me a little bit. It may cause me a lot of pain. They may even take my life. But they will never be able to break me.
In early 2013, Herman began losing weight, and I was visiting with him, and I couldn't believe who I was seeing. It was clear to all of us working on his case that Herman has some serious illness here, and it's not being treated properly. When we got his medical records and we intervened with the doctors at the prison, they sent him to LSU Medical School, where he was diagnosed with liver cancer. And the tumor on his liver was the size of a small baguette. What was happening is the doctor was completely neglecting Herman and his health issues.
In between hospital visits, they send you back to solitary when you're that old, you're that sick. You really don't pose a threat to anybody, so there was no purpose behind him being in solitary confinement except that it's something personal with the department and him.
And it was precisely treatment like this that made the Angola Three determined to bring their civil case against the state to court, even with Herman now gravely ill.
Because Herman and Robert and Albert all are plaintiffs together in the case, they have a right to meet together to plan their litigation. And the court had granted that right over the objections of the state, of course. On October 1st, we were on our way to the prison when we got word that he had won.
The federal judge reversed Herman's conviction and ordered his immediate release from the prison.
It was Corrine driving. She was so excited. She almost drove us off the road. I was sitting in the front seat. Robert was sitting in the back seat.
We went on in to visit, and we had the pleasure of telling him he thought when Albert said that going home, he said, "What, you going home?" Because he pointed at Albert, and Albert said, "No, you going home."
It was a beautiful time to be there with Robert and with Albert. Herman was very, very weak. But he came sort of in and out of being fully present with us. He definitely knew what was happening.
Yeah, we have a court order that says he needs to be released immediately.
And the prison would not release Herman, although the federal court said, "You shall release him today."
We had an ambulance come at one point, and the state turned it away. We told Herman to hang on, because we were going to get him out.
We petitioned the federal judge again.
Corrine and I immediately went to the courthouse to let them know that the prison wasn't complying and wasn't letting him go. We actually got to the courthouse just before it was closing, and the security guard said, "What are you guys doing here? Don't you know everybody's leaving? It's time to close up for the night." And we said, no, you have to let us, because we want to be able to argue directly to the judge in person if we need to.
At 3 or 4 o'clock in the day, the federal judge issued another ruling and said, "If he's not released now, I will hold all of the prison officials in contempt of court with possible jail sentences."
And the judge told us he wasn't going to leave his chambers. He was going to stay in his chambers and wait until he knew Herman was a free man. So we got back in the car, started racing back to Hunt. Corrine was calling the ambulance on her phone. I was calling the lawyers who represent the warden at Hunt to let them know it would be a really bad idea to not follow the court's instructions. Then she and I are handing to the warden the printed out order that they were to let Herman go. And finally, just as the sun was setting, the warden came and told us, okay, he's going to be able to go. The sunset was this beautiful purple and pink and orange sky, and it was just like heaven was putting on a show. It was a great night.
So Mr. Wallace is gravely ill. I've told he hadn't spoken more than 2 words in the last 3 days, but he had quite a few words for us this morning, including wow, including this is good. He asked us what are the chances he would be released in time before he passed away. We didn't know, so it will be great to see him come out of those gates right there. It's bittersweet knowing that he's been incarcerated this long, but there is some comfort in that. It was very important to Mr. Wallace that he die on free soil.
After
What is an overpass? Come on.
Nobody wants more robot tests, but we could all use more ways to save.
After 41 years of being told you committed a crime of which we know he didn't, and 41 years of solitary confinement, Herman Wallace is going to roll down the highway a free man. There is nothing that compares to that. But I knew his days were short, and so it wasn't all joy.
Everybody is smiling, yes. And you're smiling. Love you guys
Supporters in New Orleans cheer the release of Herman Wallace of the Angola Three, freed after serving nearly 42 years in solitary confinement, longer than any other prisoner in the United States. Supporters say he is near death.
It wasn't in vain. It wasn't the sacrifices that he made, the travail that he went through, the disappointments that he probably got at not getting out, and I really was looking forward to him getting out. Yeah. But anyway.
It was a long, long effort, and I think that once Herman was released, a free man, I think that's what he was fighting for all that time, and he was at peace with himself, and he maintains his innocence to the end, and I think that for him, he had won that fight.
What happened to Herman is a tragedy. It's a tragedy that this state, after viewing all the evidence, after seeing the support that this man have been able to acquire globally, after reading Amnesty's report for their release, it was a tragedy that this man be released just 3 days before he died. They sucked all the life out of him. That was the worst part of his death. That was the tragedy of his death. The greatness of his death, Herman died 1 block from where he was raised. He was able to, upon his release, go back to his old neighborhood. Go back to 1 block from the church where he got baptized in. A half a block from the house that he was raised in. He was back in his neighborhood when he died. And he died in a way that they cannot ever again say that he was a racist. Because he died in a home of a white couple that stood for justice.
Some of the physicians encouraged us to go ahead and just check him into a hospice facility because they knew he wasn't going to last much longer. But ultimately, we decided, he'd spent his entire life in a facility, in an institution. We thought, let's let him die in a home. So we brought him back here, and it was funny in the many times that I had always told him that he was welcome in my home and he could stay in the guest bedroom. He would always just give me a really hard time about it. Woman, you ain't putting me in no damn guest bedroom, because he just wanted the best for himself. So when we got him set up, I said, all right, you know where you are now. And he just kind of grumbled, damn, guest bedroom. And just throughout the next couple of days, we had so many friends and family, nieces and nephews that Herman had never had a chance to meet since he'd been incarcerated for so long, and friends that he'd been incarcerated with formerly. My home has never felt so filled with love as it did in those few days. And, we tried to make it as pleasant as we possibly could. We showed him little bits of films. We played music for him. We read to him. I had gone out just before he got here and gotten some flowers, and so I took out different